Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. Give me the Star Wars, don't let them end.
Yeah, we're talking Star Wars because it's what we do. If there was no camera here, we'd probably still be talking Star Wars. So this week, we are revisiting of the Star Wars franchise. We've been watching, by the way, we've been watching all of the Star Wars movies from in release order, and we're trying to watch as early or as close to the theatrical release as possible. So we're on Empire Strikes Back. What do you think about Empire?
One thing before Empire, because a trailer dropped on Monday. I don't want to talk too much about the trailer. Everybody should go watch it. Out of 10 on the trailer.
Ooh.
10 being the, of course.
Okay, you're gonna hate me for this. 8.
What's that?
I guess you wouldn't hate me for it, but 8.
Not a bad
I loved it. There was one thing I did. There's only one thing I didn't like in the entire thing.
Okay.
C-3PO's line.
Yeah, well, I think I know what's happening there whenever he's saying that.
I have some speculation, but like as soon as he said it, I'm like, that was just cheese. Like I didn't need that. To me, it was, or not cheese. It felt like it was a cheap shot. It was a cheap thing. Like let's get people get emotionally invested, and trigger them with that feeling. And that's the only reason I didn't like it. I hope it's better. Hope it's better in the theater. Hope it's better in the movie. And I think that those are two different lines that they split together.
Probably.
So yeah,
I think that it's a cut. Like in terms of like, I mean, in terms of a trailer, I think it was like a 9.5. Very like there like a couple of like minor things. The things with like the Emperor where like you saw the Emperor. And
pretty sure it's him. Yeah.
Yeah, and like unless it's like smoke and mirrors, but it like kind of looks like he's like. I don't know. Is he in like a robot? Like, is he in a mech? Like,
that's what I thought.
And that's a bad thing. But like, and I also wonder. It's not something that I can really like score against the trailer, but it makes me wonder, like, based off of what we've seen between Ben and Rey, is like how much of the stuff, like those fights that we're seeing, like, are those going on in like her head?
Yeah.
Like because the Force. But anyways, great trailer. Great trailer.
Great trailer. I loved it. I mean, we both were online trying to get tickets. I had a heck of a time getting mine. At the same time, it took me a little under 4 hours to get my tickets. I will say that at one point I was able to get tickets, but it was the front furthest to the right seat, and there's no way I'm doing that. So yeah, not gonna happen.
I felt bad. Like, so the theater that we actually wanted to go to that serves alcohol and stuff, like, and has the good recliners and everything. It's a big Cinemark. That kept timing out on me. So I was like, all right, fine. I'll go to the small Cinemark. And I got the tickets right away. I was the first, like, I got them for like a 4:20 showing on a Saturday. I was the first person to buy tickets in that. So I have middle row, middle of the theater, middle of the row. And I was like, I'll just take a flask in. I don't care.
That works. They're not gonna get you.
Anyway, just want to know what you thought of that trailer.
Yeah, I loved it, and that's why we're doing this. By the way, we are revisiting these movies, rewatching and revisiting this for the franchise as we're leading up to Episode 9. So
in the Skywalker saga,
to me,
it's really the ending of the R2 saga, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's more that. But we'll see how this movie goes. We'll see how it goes, and then we'll definitely talk about that later. But we watched Empire Strikes Back. This is what most people view as their favorite in the series. By the way, this is the original trailer, and if you look there, I'm going to rewind it because I think you ducked down for a second and didn't get to see it. Look at Vader's lightsaber there, unfinished.
Yeah.
So the first trailer had unfinished special effects, but you know what? It's still exciting.
This is 1979 thing.
Yeah, 1979 when the trailer came out. 1980 when the movie released. This is what most people consider to be the best Star Wars movie. Upon rewatching it, I don't know if I feel that is the case, but I will say from a character perspective, it is hands down the best movie. From a pacing perspective, it doesn't have the flow, obviously, that episode 4 has. I don't think it has the flow to episode 6, but from a character perspective, from a dialogue perspective, this is the best Star Wars movie.
Yeah, I get that. And, we were talking about it online with a friend of ours, and, like, he said that it was his favorite. I have a really hard time ranking the Star Wars movies these days, and it's just because I love the franchise so much that I don't like making that call. Like, I would prefer just to be like, I don't have a problem saying which one's my favorite, which we talked about last week in A New Hope.
Sure.
And then after that, like, I could probably say, like, we'll get to it, but I could probably say, like, what's my least favorite or something like that. But it starts to become, like, jumbled because there's so many things to love about this movie. Like you mentioned, as far as the characters, like, you see, like, and we'll get to it here in a little bit more, but, like, you really see what they were doing with Luke and Vader in terms of, like, Luke being, like, he's a chip off the old block. Like, it's funny during that fight, and we'll talk about it. But you see, like, Han really, like, he's trying to do what he knows how to do in terms of, like, the way that he puts on moves. It's not the best way to put on moves in real life or anything like that, but in terms of, like, you see it, like, he wants Leia to want him to stay there. Like, he keeps holding, like, you see him wait, you see him, like, glance at her on Hoth, like, would you just admit that you want me to stay here? Like, that's literally all he's wanting. Like he's being, kind of stubborn ass about it. But like, you can tell he doesn't completely want to leave. The reason why he has to leave is because of Jabba, but, like, he wants Leia to want him there.
Yeah, well, and I feel like in his own way, it's his way of being as sensitive as he feels like he can, as vulnerable as he will let himself be. When he's yelling at her and saying, like, just admit how you feel about me, like, because he's so used to being to putting up that front about who Han Solo is. When he's a softie, when he gets down to it, he just puts up this front of being so hard or whatever, but at the same time, like, no, he's a big softie, and he shows it more in Return of the Jedi, in my opinion. But yeah, this one has fine. It's okay. No, it's fine. So as we talk, like, I am not sure, and I'm as we're rewatching these movies, I'm really curious how I'm going to feel about some of the prequels and episode 8, because I feel like I don't think I've watched episode 8 in like a year and a half. So after watching all of this, I think it's going to bring some decent perspective into. I
watched 8 twice in theaters, and I have not seen it since. I've watched Attack of the Clones a few months ago on TNT, and it's always funny as far as those go. That's like those moments of, like, it's just, they show the prequels and they show the originals a lot. There's, like, a period of the year, and it's like, I have the DVDs right there, but, like, whatever. Like, just leave these on.
I have them on Plex. I have the DVDs, and I have them on Plex because I was just like, this is just really easy. So
yeah, and that's what I'm liking about the new ones, because I have Rogue One, Episode 7, and Episode 8 all on digital. So, like, those are just it's funny just how lazy we are.
Yeah, of course.
Literally, like, all I gotta do is put the disc in my console, and I hate doing that.
Yeah. It's like, I gotta get up. No. Yeah, if we could, we wouldn't do any of that. But so favorite part of this movie. There's a lot in this movie. What's your favorite part?
The first favorite thing that I just wanted to mention as a continuation of last week's is they're still saying Falcon and not Falcon. So still saying Falcon. Just want to put that out there. There's two favorite parts.
I think one person says Falcon, by the way, in the movie. I'm pretty sure one person says Falcon, everyone else says Falcon. Or I guess I know Vader says Falcon.
Yeah,
but I'm pretty sure
Han says Falcon.
Yes, but Lando, I'm pretty sure, says Falcon.
We'll have to see, because so Han says, "I'll get her out on the Falcon," and then I forget when Vader says Falcon, but he was, like, on the Executor, I think. So I don't know if you want to go to the, like, I have two favorite. I have the part where I have the new thing that I noticed, which is also one of my favorite parts, and then there's the duel. So which way do you want to go first?
So let's I guess a new thing that you noticed, because I have a new thing that I noticed that's also a thing that bugs me. But let's do yours first, because it'll probably be a little more positive.
This is one of my favorite scenes, just because. Shut up, Siri. Just because. This is where you start to see the Force, and like that's always been my favorite thing about Star Wars. I'm sure it's everybody's favorite thing about Star Wars. Maybe not. That's not true, actually. There's plenty of things to love about Star Wars, but I love the Jedi. Like the Jedi are my thing. Sure. And he goes to Dagobah and he starts hanging out with Yoda. And the new thing that I noticed here is that you get a very small reference in how powerful the Force is and how powerful specifically Yoda is. So Yoda's talking to him. They're in his hut, and it's where he talks about how impatient he is. And so he's like, long have I watched you were always focused on the future and never concerned with being right there. You're reckless, no focus on where he was, what he was doing. So Yoda's been watching him this whole time, from Dagobah, with this dark, with the dark side thing there that also clouds some stuff. And really, we don't see that happening a whole lot until Episode 8 with the Force imaging. Like, there's nothing that really that like spans the galaxy. Like, Dagobah is not close to Tatooine. We see Darth Vader talk to Luke while he's flying by the ship. That happens. We know that some weird stuff happens with the Emperor and the midi-chlorians and stuff later, which we'll talk about. But in terms of Yoda, I had never realized like that's specifically what he was talking about, that he was like talking about watching him. Like, he doesn't own any technology. Like, he was watching him through the Force.
I think he says, long have I watched this one, I think is like the beginning of that line. I noticed it this time as well. I forgot. I completely forgot that I did notice it for the first time, that watching it this time, because I know that there's a similar line where he talks about, where I think that he was talking about his father, about Anakin, saying that never his mind was on where he was. And like, I forgot that he mentioned that he's literally saying, I've watched you forever. And I thought that was really interesting. And it does show the power of the Force, especially after, with the prequels, we'll talk about like them losing some sight. Yoda still has some power and is able to do a lot more than Luke thinks that he can.
Yoda's a bad man, man. Like, we don't really see it a lot. He's one of the best parts of the prequels, not just because like he kind of goes major, like in some ways it kind of goes weird, and not unbelievable, but like you just see that he's a bad man. Like, he's been around for so long, but noticing that made me respect a little bit more what Luke was able to accomplish in Episode 8. Not that Luke is anywhere as powerful as Yoda, but especially because he had kind of abandoned the Force at that point. We'll talk more about that later. But that it made it more believable. The fact that Yoda could watch him a planet away and just kind of keep an eye on Luke and see what's up, that was awesome. But that whole thing, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because I meant to write it down, but I didn't. The fact that like he's calling out Anakin's flaws, and you never realized. I never thought about that either until again last night, where I was like, Anakin was like that in the prequels. Like he was a total thing, and that leads me to the other part where like the dual stuff. So what is before we get there? What's the thing that you noticed / bugged you?
The thing that I noticed, so there's something that everyone that I think that knows about Empire Strikes Back and knows about a specific character in Lando Calrissian, because Lando calls Han Solo Han, right?
Yeah,
he's the only one who calls him Han. I don't know I don't know if Billy D hadn't seen the first Star Wars movie, if he just wanted to call him Han. I don't know what the choice was there. No one stopped him. I mean, he's Billy D. Williams, so who's going to stop him? But here's the thing that irritated me that I never noticed before.
Okay.
Is that when the three of them are in a scene, because she does this, I think, twice, Leia refers to him as Han.
So does 3PO.
And so does 3PO call him Han? I thought he called him Han.
Yeah, he calls him, I mean, he calls him Han.
I thought it was like I guess the British kind of accent thing, because like everyone calls him Han.
Yeah, like not all the time in the Cloud City, because Chewie's choking him out.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he's saying Han. Like,
yes. Yeah. Well, I get, yeah, because Lando was saying Han.
Yeah.
But Leia, when she's talking to Lando and you know, Han's recovering from being tortured, and he's like, oh, he doesn't want you. He wants what's his kid named Skywalker or whatever. She's like, what about Han? And like every other scene, I remember her calling him Han. And then she calls him Han in this. Maybe I'm misremembering it, but I guess because I was remembering that Billy D. Williams calls him Han, I thought about that. But yeah, you're right. 3PO does call him Han in that scene too.
Oh yeah, only because he's
Lando's called him Han. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
Well, I just thought maybe it's the same thing that she kind of did with when she's talking to Tarkin, like her third scene or whatever, but like her first scene where she's talking to Tarkin and they're talking about Alderaan, and she's like speaking in a British accent at the beginning. So I wasn't sure if it's like because who she's playing off of and who she's acting with. I just thought that was interesting. I never caught it before. It didn't irritate me too bad, but it did kind of throw me off a little bit.
What's even funnier about that is if he goes Han but he also says Falcon, and so now I'm really curious if he said Falcon. And so if he said Falcon when everybody else is saying Falcon, and then he says Han when everybody else is saying
and we give him crap for saying Han, and we don't about Falcon. I have a feeling he calls it the Falcon because Vader refers to it as the Falcon. Yeah. He doesn't say Millennium Falcon, he says the Falcon. They're in Cloud City. Yeah. But yeah, I just thought that was something I never noticed. So there's so many little things to notice on there, and I'm not, you know.
The thing that bugged me was a really little thing. That honestly, this movie is pretty perfect. Much like Episode 4 for it, and that's Tauntauns. Not anything, but like the only thing, they live there. Like I looked it up. I specifically looked, and like they are native to Hoth, according to Wikipedia. I spend a lot of time on Wikipedia.
Oh, sure, me too.
I hate it. I go down a rabbit hole every single time. I started reading stories about the Dark Side Cave and how many different people have visited that Dark Side Cave. Pretty interesting. The guy from Force Unleashed does. Like that's what, for those of you who don't know, Yoda's using the Dark Side Cave to shield himself from detection by the Emperor. Yeah. So I went down a rabbit hole, but Tauntauns are native to Hoth. They made them horses, cool, but you're telling me a planet that really doesn't have a whole lot of caves, at least from what we can see. A creature exists on that planet and dies at night. Like it's so. Where do they go? Where are all the native ones going at night that they can't survive? Like, what the heck is the difference between like
do they go in the caves like the Wampas?
Well,
and then the Wampas are just going to come in there and eat them.
Yeah, I'm guessing the Wampa, just like happened in the thing. The Wampa's clearly the predator, and the Tauntaun is not. But I didn't get why it died. Like they were like, you're gonna your Tauntaun's gonna freeze out there. I'll see you in hell. Oh, they live there.
Yeah.
You're telling me that the evolution of this creature can't handle its planet's temperature. Very minor thing to bug me, but like I understand it was probably more of like a convenience. And even on Wikipedia, it actually says specifically like they can handle the temperatures during the day. They freeze at night. I was like,
so where? Yeah, you're like, so where do you go? Yeah, like so they have to have some type of cave system, or you'd think that someone would write something and be like, oh well, they're in this region, they're okay, but the region that the rebel base was in is colder because Hoth is just all ice. But I would assume that we're at like X degrees of the equator and we're colder. Maybe they're on the North Pole of Hoth. I don't know.
Oh yeah, for sure. But again, very minor thing to bother me. Sure. It was just something that I happened to be like, why does it die? Like it lives there. Yeah. And then I wanted to reference the thing from last week that bugged me before we go on to the duel. So James Earl Jones, again, not in the credits. He's not in the credits at all for episode 4 or episode 5. I didn't realize that. I went back and checked out 4's credits. He literally does not exist in the credits. In Empire Strikes Back, the guy that you mentioned that is in the
David
Vader
Prowse.
suit, yeah,
David
he
Prowse,
is
yeah.
in the credits before the producers and stuff. So Prowse. But what I found out after researching this online last night was this was actually at James Earl Jones' request.
Oh.
So he, a couple people are like, this is the nice way of saying he thought it was going to bomb. But he said that he considered himself a special effect. Since he's not the one in the suit, he considered his voice kind of a special effect. So he didn't want to be typecasted. He referenced the Exorcist movie where the girl who plays the devil version of her is not credited. And so he kind of considered himself the same way. And then apparently by Return of the Jedi, he was like, okay, put me in the credits. And so a couple people speculated that he thought Star Wars was going to bomb. And then he mentions the thing about being typecasted. And so he didn't want to do it. And then, by the time we get to how successful Empire Strikes Back is, he's like, all right, fine, I guess I'll be in the and then I also found out they added his name in the credits for all of the all the re-releases. So if I look on my widescreen version, he's probably in there, but I'm watching the theatrical release, and that's why he's not. So fun little tidbit.
That's good. I'm watching the theatrical as well. I didn't notice that though, because you're watching the theatrical on the DVD special.
The one that's on the special features.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I'm watching them via it's the despecialized version.
Yeah.
So it's those DVDs, laser discs, and a couple other sources that they edited together. Every now and then there's a part that's in Hoth, there was a little bit of darkness. I was like, I don't like that, but for the most part, it's fantastic. I didn't get to talk about my favorite bit on here before we talk about the duel. My favorite bit, this is possibly one of my favorite parts in any Star Wars movie, is the interaction between Han and Leia on the Falcon, because you have a moment where, obviously, as I mentioned before, Han is always putting up this front about how cool he is and how suave he is, and he's a softie, when it gets down to it. And Leia kind of does the same thing, especially because her being a survivor of Alderaan, it's not about just being a princess. Now she's becoming a general. I don't think she's a general yet.
She's not a general in this.
Yeah, she's not a general in this one, but she's on that path, and nothing else is important to her other than this, and she can't admit it to herself. When he's talking about her trembling here, because he's saying she's scared and that she's trembling, this whole interaction is one of the best scenes in any Star Wars movie. The kiss is great, and then 3PO coming in and interrupting is just hilarious. So much. It's one of the greatest moments in any movie, and then she has to peace out real quick because she can't deal with it. She can't deal with her feelings, and that's, like I said, it's probably one of the best moments in Star Wars, and it's how you successfully write two characters who are falling in love, even though they're not supposed to be falling in love, which we'll see not done well in the prequels. So.
Yeah. Well, it's because she's a rebel. So, it's not just that she's a princess too. She's been a rebel her whole life. Yeah. Which is on top of that, and as we see from Rogue One, whenever we talk about Cassian and stuff, you see what that life kind of leads you through. That the cause is kind of more important. And I really like during that scene also where Han admits that. He's like, I'm a difficult guy. I get it. But he's like, you could also be just a little nicer. That is a truly great scene. And that is it's also just it's definitely one of the best starting love scenes. I would say just in movies in general, where it's a non-romantic movie and they added in there, it didn't feel any kind of forced.
Yeah, it wasn't forced. It was just these characters naturally. That's how they felt about each other. And I think that you got to give credit to Lawrence Kasdan in this, because this was written. Kasdan was the director, and then I can't remember if he was the person who wrote it.
There's
with,
like 2 writers.
Yeah, so because Lucas wrote the story, and then 2 people did the screenplay. So between them and the director, it fixed a lot of dialogue issues, or I would say it made the dialogue less clumsy, made it a lot more natural. The other bit in here, what's that?
Which again, we're going to go into the prequels when Lucas took back over.
Oh yeah, exactly. And the other thing, I should have had this queued up. The other possibly best, maybe best line in Star Wars that's quoted all the time is the whole "I love you, I know" bit, which, as you know, was not improvised, but it was Harrison Ford's suggestion on set to do that. You knew
It's very much. It's very solo, because who knows why, from a character standpoint, that he can't say it in that moment, but it could be because he may be about to die, so he doesn't want to. Who knows, what you're supposed to think of the character's thinking. I honestly always thought it was a little cheese. Not in a I think it's from the guy's standpoint, it's oh, cool, man, he can say it back, but at the same time, if I was her, I would just be pissed, which I think one of the novelizations of Shadows of the Empire. I think she is.
I think so. I'm gonna reread that, by the way. I'm rereading some Star Wars books. Shadows is great. I'm reading Lords of the Sith right now, which is one of the new canon books. But I always viewed it I didn't assume that she was mad. I guess she is in the novelization. I just assumed that she knew who he was and knew him saying that was his way of saying it. But yeah, I love that interaction. But we want to talk about the duel. And do you think this is the best lightsaber duel
of the
series? Of the series?
All of Star Wars?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, I'm not talking about the ability, but I guess the setup.
No, okay. No, but Duel of the Fates is so good, and Duel of the Fates is the best Star Wars. That's the best lightsaber fight.
From choreography standpoint, yeah, I agree. From choreography, yes.
In terms of but the thing that made this so great, and you don't know that Vader's his father at this point, but after you know that he's his father, you see it where he knocks him into the chamber all too easy, and then there's another point where Vader compliments Luke, saying basically that he's not as easy, that his skills have grown, and Luke's well, I'm full of surprises. They're both such cocky SOBs.
Yeah. It's true. And watching this and knowing that he's his father, you can tell that he's not doing any of this to injure him, because before, when you're oh, well, it's because he's talking about the Luke being the Emperor's prize, and wanting to bring the Emperor Luke back as a prize, but at the same time, that at the first viewing, that's what you're thinking if you didn't know the twist.
Yeah.
But then watching it again, you're he's not only he's testing him, he's testing his son here and seeing how powerful he is, and how maybe close to the dark side he is at this point. So it's a great. I meant from a storytelling perspective. I think that it's a great duel. From a choreography perspective, no, it's not.
No, the scene stuff is definitely overall better, because that was the problem with episode 1, is with Darth Maul and everything. He they fleshed him out later greatly so, and he's a great character.
Yeah.
When you watch Rebels, just we'll get to it. We're gonna make you watch Rebels next year when it's on Disney Plus. No, from that perspective, no, it's great. It's better than Return of the Jedi for sure. The only other one I'd probably put up against it from story is episode 3's with Obi-Wan and Anakin, because that's such a great fight. Yes. such a great emotional fight. The lines are a little cheese, the Hayden Christensen's kind of ruining it, but when you kind of strip all that away, that part is great. I just that's where this favorite part of me, Vader's toying with this. Like, you know, you said that he's testing him. Like, I say he's toying with him the whole time.
Yeah.
And you see the cockiness with the all too easy. You saw it in episode 4 where he has zero respect for Obi-Wan anymore. It's like, your power's a weak, old man. Like, it's so funny to see like how Vader is. I think that's what makes him so cool, because there's the moments where he gets angry. You see him choke out the admiral and promote a new admiral right then and there.
Yep.
Because apparently he can. But it's just totally toying with him. The only part that I wonder if he wasn't toying with him is the part that you showed there right before the clip went off, when he falls off. Like, do you think that he's kind of jumping off so that he can like do a reset up, or do you think that like Luke actually like, you know, not did anything to him there, because he obviously didn't, but like did Luke make a move that actually made him fall, or was he jumping off?
That's a good point. I think he was jumping off. I think that he was again continuing to test and see what Luke was going to do. You know, because they'd had, you know, their straight, you know, head on fight, and he's like, all right, well, is he going to continue to pursue me if I leave? What's going to happen? Is he going to go try to find his friends, which would leave him vulnerable, or does he face me head on? And he continues to press Vader. I think that's what it was, but then again, we're analyzing it a lot. So
yeah, but this is where like we already saw how powerful Yoda was.
Yeah,
and obviously none of this stuff is an X-wing or anything, but he's, you know, we don't know how bolted some of that stuff is in the wall, so he literally is breaking things out of the wall to throw at him. He's fighting him and throwing stuff at the same time. Like, this is where you truly see like, yeah, I mean, you're good for somebody who's been doing this for, you know, a year or however long it's been. Like, but
it's that whole.
You're not Darth Vader, son.
Yeah, it's that whole like person who whatever you know, belt system you're in, like it's like a blue belt versus a black belt kind of in jiu-jitsu. It's like, all right, yeah, you're doing all right, but you got nothing. So I think it's an amazing duel, and obviously the end of the duel. I also think that the pacing for the end of the movie is done so well, because you have the reveal. You have of no, I am your father, which everyone misquotes. It's truncated because everyone wants to truncate that to be Luke, I am your father, but it's no, I'm your father. He chooses to, essentially, he doesn't know if he's going to die or what, but he basically chooses to die before joining.
Props to Luke.
Yeah, gets with Leia and the Falcon, and then you got a quick wrap up. Like, that's one thing that I liked about the movie, is you didn't need a huge wrap up. That told you so much. It told you he's back with them. They're going to promise to get Han, and there's more rebellion than we originally thought. I thought that was really cool, seeing the frigate and all the other ships at the very end. You're like, okay, there's hope. We hit a bleak moment, but there's still hope, and we'll have to see what happens.
Yes, and so you mentioned that the hope, and you mentioned like, so I had this last note about it in comparing it to Episode 8, and obviously we're going to get to Episode 8 later, but in terms of a middle of the arc movie, and we can even put it against Clone Wars a little bit. Clone Wars ended, like they had the army there, they had, you know, they said the Clone Wars had begun. So like, it's not the same, but 8 and 2, or not 2, 5 really mirror each other a lot in terms of like how they're supposed to end. Like, they have a little bit of hope because they escaped. The only thing is that you really there's a direction at the end of Empire. Like, Lando sets it up. Hey, we're gonna go find Han from Jabba, and we'll let you know, and we'll rendezvous on Tatooine when that happens. Cool. We know that there's a rebellion there, like, versus what they did in 8, where you literally have no effing clue. Like, what are they have nothing. Like, they're not, there's no way that they could ever fight. Right?
Well, that felt like the ending of what would be a 7, or would be the beginning of an arc. It didn't feel like the midway point through an arc.
That's my biggest criticism. Is that versus Empire, whenever 7 was such a good a good reboot, and we'll get to talk about how many times me and my wife have argued about 7 and where it stands, because I love 7 so much.
Sure.
A great beginning of the arc, and then to like ruin it with the 8 versus what Empire did, where Empire is the perfect middle movie. There is not a better middle movie in any. You could watch any trilogy ever. Back to the Future 2 sucks. Temple of Doom is fine, but like there's no real arc with those anyway. It's just a trilogy. But like, look at any trilogy that you ever see and compare it to like Empire, where it is in terms of storytelling perspective. Like there's lots of great. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 is good, but like there's no better story-driven middle arc than Empire Strikes Back.
Well, yeah, and I agree. I think that they knew, Lucas and his writers and everyone knew this is part 2. We've got one more part, and that's, I mean, at the time Lucas was saying like, oh, we'll probably go back and do the prequels. But at the time, like, Lucas is quoted as saying, like, I'm just, like, in regards to Return of the Jedi, he was like, I'm doing this because I need to finish it and then I'm done. Like, he talked for years about not wanting to do the prequels and maybe having someone else do prequels because you know, it was a lot for him. And I think that 5 set it up that way because he was like, we know where we're going. And 8, I don't think Rian Johnson knew where he was going. Anyways, we'll talk about that when we talk about episode 8.
It's hard not to throw some of that stuff in there, and like we'll be able to reverse it the other direction. It's just that's my biggest criticism of 8 versus 5, because you want to compare it, like, again, we're talking about a movie that's everybody's favorite pretty much. Like it's established in the ether that Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie.
Yeah, and it may not be mine. We'll have to see how this goes. I've been saying, I don't know, like we're about to watch Jedi, and Jedi for a few reasons is so good. So we'll talk about that next week. Anyways, final thoughts on Empire.
I'm having so much fun with this, man. Like, so we're 2 movies in, and I'm watching them the night before on purpose. Even though my son doesn't know anything that's going on because he's 4 months old, but he's gotten to watch like 5 or 10 minutes before I put him to bed during the movies, and so I'm getting like literally his first movie I can say was A New Hope that he watched. He didn't watch all of it, but he watched the Death Star scene. This is so much fun to really look at it from these, like, just looking for things, like not just like not just to enjoy, but I'm looking for stuff. Empire is, again, it's the great, like, even if it may not be like my top 3 Star Wars movies, we'll really see. I'm kind of just, I might put a definitive ranking when we're in, at least at that time. I think it changes a lot.
Sure.
It's the best sequel ever.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a better sequel than Empire Strikes Back.
I would say that,
other than Aliens,
Terminator 2, and Godfather 2 are considered, you know, where the sequel is better than the original. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say it's better than any of those movies where it lines up. I will say definitively it is better because it leads into and creates a better arc, because those movies had horrible third movies. So yeah, it's the good.
Yeah,
it's
good stuff.
Anyways, catch us next time where we talk Return of the Jedi and we revisit another great movie from Star Wars. And may the Force be with you.
And be with you.